All right, as we're handing out the schedules, I just want to point out a couple of things on the paper. The first one is you'll notice that I forgot to put the scriptures down for the fall of Israel, and so I'll have an update for that whenever I have time to correct that. I apologize. I didn't proofread my schedule before I ran copies of it. The second thing is I'll be out May 8th and the 15th. Curtis will be teaching Josiah on May the 8th, and I had somebody who volunteered to teach on May the 15th, and now I have forgotten who it was. So if you that, well, Jim said he couldn't, so I had somebody else, but now I can't remember who it was. In any case, we had somebody. If it was you, remind me, please. All right. From last week, let's real quick do a recap here. Why did God divide the kingdom? Okay, because of Solomon. Specifically, what about Solomon? Okay, so Solomon served other gods, and his wives turned him away from the Lord. So the other part of that question is why didn't God just... What happened when Saul turned away from the Lord? The Lord took the entire kingdom away from Saul. Why didn't the Lord take the entire kingdom away from Solomon's descendants? Okay, because of David. So God made a promise to David, and he was unwilling to completely remove the kingdom from David's line. So we want to talk about Jeroboam this evening, and I want to start by saying I find the story of Jeroboam, I struggle for a long time with Jeroboam, and I'll explain why as we go, but his story is a perplexing one to me for several reasons. And I think I understand it a little better now, having studied it for this class, but I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about some of these questions that I've had. Let's start with 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 29 through 38. Can I get a volunteer to read 1 Kings chapter 11, verses 29 through 38? Go ahead, Brother Walton.
1 Kings 11, verses 29 through 38. And it came to pass at that time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem that the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him in the way. And he had clad himself with a new garment, and they two were alone in the field. And Ahijah caught the new garment that was on him and rent it in 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, Take thee 10 pieces. For thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, Behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon, and will give 10 tribes to thee. But he shall have 1 tribe for my servant David's sake, and for Jerusalem's sake, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because that they have forsaken me, and have worshipped Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Zidonians, Chemosh, the god of the Moabites, and Milcom, the god of the children of Ammon, and have not walked in my ways, to do that which is right in my eyes, and to keep my statutes and my judgments, as did David his father. Howbeit, I will not take the whole kingdom out of his hand, but I will make him prince all the days of his life for David my servant's sake, whom I chose, because he kept my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom out of his son's hand, and will give it unto thee, even 10 tribes. And unto his son will I give 1 tribe, that David my servant may have a light always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen me to put my name there. And I will take thee, and thou shalt reign according to all that thy soul desireth, and he shall be king over Israel. And it shall be, if thou wilt hearken unto all that I command thee, and wilt walk in my ways, and do that which is right in my sight, to keep my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, that I will be with thee, and build thee a sure house, as I built for David, and will give Israel unto thee.
All right. So, there's a lot to unpack in these verses, but the first thing I want to note is that God says, I have taken the kingdom away from Solomon, because he turned away from me and worshipped other gods. And he lists some of those there. The second thing he says is God makes a promise to Jeroboam. What is the promise that God makes to Jeroboam? Okay, so first part of it is king over 10 tribes. So he's going to take the kingdom away from Solomon's son, and he's going to give the majority of it to Jeroboam. And I think I left the clicker up here. Yep, there we go. All right. Timeline here, but this is the slide I wanted to show you. Okay, so you can see here in the south, we have the kingdom of Judah. Here in the north, we have the kingdom of Israel. Over here, Moab. Over here, Ammon. Up here is the Tyre and Sidon, so the god of the Sidonians here, and then Philistia down here. All right. Go back up here. So, what's the second part of the promise to Jeroboam? Yeah. The second part of the promise, I think, is even more important than the first part of the promise. He says, if you will keep my commandments, keep my commandments and walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes, as David my servant did, I will be with you. I will build you a sure house, as I built for David, and I will give Israel to you. That's a pretty impressive promise, isn't it? He says, okay, over here is David. I want you to note that I'm not taking this kingdom fully away from David. I'm going to leave him part of it for David's sake. David was obedient. So even though Solomon was disobedient, because David was obedient, his descendants are going to keep the kingdom. Okay, Jeroboam, here's the deal. Walk in my ways and my statutes, and the kingdom is not only yours, but I'll establish your house. How important was dynasty to kings of this time period? Extremely. Very important. To some degree, you would almost say that's everything, right? Because anytime a king comes in and throws down a previous ruler, what's one of the first things that he does? Yeah, he wipes out the entire royal line, right? Let's go kill all the sons. Let's go kill all the grandsons. Let's make sure that nobody's around to usurp the throne after I've usurped it. Because that would be terrible, right? And God says, I will establish you a sure house. So he's offering Jeroboam dynasty. He's offering him a perpetual kingdom, not just... All right, so let's read. How does Jeroboam respond to this? 2 Kings chapter 12, verses 25 through 33. Somebody read that for me. Anyone? Oh, there we go. There's a hand over there. Aaron. 2 Kings 12, 25 through 33. I'm sorry, 1 Kings. Yep.
You'll have to wait just a little bit longer then.
Mistake. It's 1 Kings and 2 Chronicles that we're in right now, so that won't be the last time I do that, I promise you.
1 Kings 12, 25 through 33. Then Jeroboam built Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim and lived there. And he went out from there and built Penuel. And Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn back to their Lord, to Rehoboam the king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam king of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold, and he said to the people, you've gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one at Bethel, and the other put at Dan. Then this thing became a sin. For the people went as far as Dan to be before one. Then he also made temples on high places, and appointed priests from among all the people, who were not of the Levites. And Jeroboam appointed a feast on the 15th day of the 8th month, like the feast that was in Judah. And he offered sacrifices on the altar. So he did in Bethel, sacrificing to the calves that he made. And he placed in Bethel the priests of the high places that he had made. He went up to the altar that he had made in Bethel on the 15th day in the 8th month, on the month that he had devised from his own heart. And he instituted a feast for the people of Israel, and he went up to the altar to make offerings.
Okay. Jeroboam receives the first part of the promise from God. He gets 10 tribes. He builds Shechem in the hill country of Ephraim, and he rules from Shechem. And then he turns around and does what? Yeah. Builds idols at Dan and Bethel, and right, so there's Bethel, and there's Dan. So far north end, far south end. Bethel in particular is close to Bethlehem and Jerusalem over here. So where were the people supposed to go to worship? They were supposed to go up to Jerusalem. Bethel's pretty close. Jeroboam says, hey, no need to go all the way to Jerusalem. Got these awesome golden calves here at Bethel and Dan. So we got localized worship, even better than... And here's the thing. Did Jeroboam tell him to go worship some other god there? He set up an idol, which in a sense is another god. Absolutely right. He's not breaking away. He's not telling him to go worship Baal. He's not telling him to go worship the god of the Ammonites or the god of the Sidonians. He says, this is your god. Where'd these golden calves come from? Exodus, Egypt. Yeah, we're familiar with these golden calves. Apparently, they hadn't forgotten that they really liked worshiping golden calves. I don't know why they picked cows. Go ahead, Kyle. Yeah, he made priests out of the people who weren't Levites. So there's a lot going on in this verse. It took me a long time to understand what happened here. Let me ask you a question. And this is a thought question. Think about this as we look at some other things. Did God know what was going to happen when he appointed Jeroboam to be king? Nod your head yes, because he did. So why did he do that? Why appoint Jeroboam to be king? Surely there's somebody else he could have appointed to be king that wouldn't have done what Jeroboam just did, right? I heard somebody say, I don't know about that. I don't. You're right. I don't know about that. He did. He just spent the period. I think you're probably right about that. Same place that supposition, but it's a pretty educated guess, I'd say, given the fact that when the children of Israel came up out of Egypt, that was their shtick as well. All right. Yeah, that's true. That's a really interesting point. I've forgotten that he did that. Go ahead, Mary. There's a mic coming if you want to.
What Rehoboam was doing, they said, okay, David, just take your own house. We're out of here.
Right.
So their attitude's already that. And then it says, and they got Jeroboam and made him king. Now, God had already told Jeroboam he would be king, but they have the same attitude. And God already knows the attitude of these people. And so they're actually demonstrating the kind of people they really are.
Let's flip back. That's a great point, and I'm gonna emphasize that point by saying, let's flip back to think about Saul for a second. Did God know what was going to happen when he appointed Saul as king? Yeah, absolutely. What was the point of making Saul king then? And again, this is speculation, but make an educated guess based on what you know about God and what you know about his people and what you know about Saul. Why make Saul king? Okay, it's a bit of a test. Go ahead, Ren.
Well, you can't take free will out of this. You know, God made them eat, and in each case, they had an opportunity to have gone in the right direction, to worship God. And in both cases, or in most cases, starting with Adam and Eve, free will is always got to be part of it.
Absolutely.
And you can't take the fact that God knows that we're going to sin and then say, well, God's going to smack us because of it.
Right.
He's going to let us make that choice, just as we have to make the choice to come back to him.
Yep. And I think there's some. Let's follow that train of thought. So, what kind of king? What were the characteristics of King Saul that he was chosen for? Okay. He was tall, he was strong, he was handsome. He was sort of the people's ideal king, right? How well did that go? Pretty poorly, all right? Well, we could summarize that whole thing up and say, bad. It didn't go well. Saul was the people's ideal for a king, and yet, the very first thing that we find is that he's having trouble with the Philistines, he's having trouble with raiders, he's having other problems here and there, and then David comes, and now Saul's having problems with David, and Saul's reign is plagued by problems. To the point that eventually he fails to carry out the command of the Lord. The Lord says, I'm going to take it away, and he's going to appoint a man after his own heart, David. But how would we describe the overall state of David's kingdom politically? How does God describe David? Man of blood. So 40 years of David's reign are described in violent terms. We had external conquests. We had civil war. In fact, from the very beginning, I'm going to go back to my timeline here. Nope, doesn't go back far enough. All right. But if we go back to the timeline, we see that Ishbosheth was made king, and Saul was also made king, and Ishbosheth ruled over Israel, and David ruled over Judah. So this is not the first time that the tribes of Israel have been in conflict with each other over who ought to rule. What's the other character? So because David was a man of blood, God didn't allow what? Didn't allow him to build the temple. Okay, that's another piece here. Despite being a man after God's own heart, we would say David's reign was far from perfect. All right, so then we get Solomon. Solomon became king. 2 Samuel 12 and 14 says that the Lord loved Solomon. And 1 Kings 3:10 talks about the Lord being pleased that Solomon had asked for wisdom. So what would we say characterized Solomon's reign? Okay, starts out good, peace and prosperity, ends badly. But all throughout Solomon's reign, what's kind of the undercurrent? How does Jeroboam get the people to rebel against Solomon in the first place? Or against Rehoboam, sorry. What's the issue? Taxes, hard labor. He's overworked the people. So Solomon is a harsh taskmaster. So he's got peace and prosperity. He made gold as common as silver, but there's still some problems, aren't there? What's God pointing out with all these different men in 120 years of the United Kingdom? They have aligned themselves with all the evils of the people they didn't remove from Canaan, and no reign is perfect. Remember what God told Samuel? They rejected who? They rejected God. They rejected God as being king. So God gives them earthly kings, and the earthly kings aren't perfect. Every one of the earthly kings' reign is characterized by some kind of problem. Violence, Baal worship, or other god worship, overworking, problems that Saul had. We could say he was not in his right mind. You had a king who wasn't a fit ruler. All right. So, in that piece, Solomon turns away from the Lord. In fact, his first act after consolidating his kingdom is to make a marriage alliance with Egypt. Now, Egypt was less of a problem than the other people that Solomon marries. If you go back and you look at the commandments, the Israelites were not to despise an Egyptian or an Edomite. So that one's less bad, but he's still making marriage alliances, which wasn't what God wanted. All right, here's another thought. What were the people like during the reign of Saul, David, and Solomon? Start with Saul. What was happening during Saul's reign? Okay. Who were they fighting against during Saul's reign? Philistines. In fact, they were being oppressed by the Philistines. What does it mean when God's people are being oppressed by a foreign nation? They were doing something wrong. That's exactly right. Because what God promised them was, if you will serve me, then I will be your shield. I will be your wall. I'll keep the other nations out. I'll subdue them for you. You won't even have to fight your own battles. But they're oppressed by the Philistines. That tells you that something is wrong in the heart of the people during Saul's reign. What's the characteristic of the people during David's reign? So David, he manages to put the Philistines down. David's got some personal problems, and what does the personal problems turn into? Yep, and that sin because of Bathsheba and becomes what? Nationally speaking. Rebellion, civil war. Yeah, you've got people who say, got it. We're going to take advantage of this little blip on the radar here. They tried to have a civil war. Is that the characteristic of a people interested in following God? Remember, what's David's attitude towards Saul the entire time he serves that Saul is alive? He's God's anointed. I'm not going to touch him. No way. We don't touch God's anointed. But the characteristic of the people in David's time, they don't share his sensibilities that he is appointed by God. They're willing to rebel against David with his son. All right. Solomon, his reign ends, and what do we find the people are ready to do again? They're ready to split again. They're ready to rebel the moment Solomon's gone. So, what kind of people do we have the entire time? When God frequently calls Israel and Judah what? Okay, harlots is one thing he calls them, but a what people? A stiff-necked people, stubborn and rebellious. I heard all of those. That's all correct. Yes. That's what we see time and again, isn't it? Stubborn and rebellious. Okay. So let's come back to our earlier question. Why did God appoint Jeroboam to be king? All right. I'll give you another hint. Let's read 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 26 and 27. Oops. Let's see here. Is that the right one? No. Might be 2nd Chronicles. Hang on. It might be where they all leave. I think it's in Chronicles. Yep, here we go. 2nd Chronicles chapter 11, starting in verse 13. And the priests and Levites who were in all Israel presented themselves to him from all the places where they lived. For the Levites left their common lands and their holdings and came to Judah and Jerusalem, because Jeroboam and his sons cast them out from serving as priests of the Lord. And he appointed his own priests for the high places, and for the goat idols, and for the calves that he had made. And those who had set their hearts to seek the Lord God of Israel came after them from all the tribes of Israel to Jerusalem to sacrifice to the Lord, the God of their fathers. The very thing that Jeroboam said, I'm going to stop this from happening, was actually what ended up happening. Why did God make Jeroboam king? What did it do? So remember, some of the people left. What does that mean? Some stayed. Maybe even we could say most of them stayed. What does that mean? A remnant was left to follow God. They showed their hearts. That's it exactly. They showed their real colors, didn't they? God made Jeroboam king, and the northern 10 tribes showed who they really were. The faithful migrate south to Rehoboam's kingdom. The not so faithful stay there with Jeroboam and do whatever they want. All right. So why does God appoint Jeroboam to be king? God gave the people the leadership that they asked for. God gave people the leadership that they deserved. He tried showing them what would happen through the reign of Saul and David and Solomon, but the idolatry has clearly never gone away. They're content to worship the gold. The people that stay are happy to follow Jeroboam's plan and worship the calves. All right, Jeroboam himself, he saw what happened to Solomon. And yet, guess what happens next? How does God respond to Jeroboam? What's that? Okay, he sends the prophet, and all right, we got 15 minutes left, so I'm going to have to speed up just a little bit. All right, we have a prophecy against the future of what Jeroboam's trying to set up. 1 Kings chapter 13, verses 1 through 9. A man of God came out of Judah by word of the Lord to Bethel. Jeroboam was standing by the altar to make offerings, and the man cried against the altar by the word of the Lord and said, O altar, altar, thus says the Lord, behold, a son shall be born to the house of David, Josiah by name, and he shall sacrifice on you the priests of the high places, who make offerings on you, and human bones shall be burned on you. And he gave a sign the same day, saying, This is the sign the Lord has spoken. Behold, the altar shall be torn down, and the ashes that are on it shall be poured out. And when the king heard the saying of the man of God, which he cried against the altar at Bethel, Jeroboam stretched out his hand from the altar, saying, Seize him. And his hand, which he stretched out against him, dried up, so that he could not draw it back to himself. The altar was also torn down, and the ashes poured out, according to the sign that the man of God had given by the word of the Lord. And the king said to the man of God, Entreat now the favor of the Lord your God, and pray for me that my hand may be restored to me. And the man of God entreated the Lord, and the king's hand was restored to him, and became as it was before. And the king said to the man of God, Come home with me, and refresh yourself, and I will give you a reward. And the man of God said to the king, If you give me half your house, I will not go in with you. I will not eat bread or drink water in this place, for so was it commanded me by the word of the Lord, saying, You shall neither eat bread nor drink water, nor return by the way that you came. So he went another way, and did not return by the way that he came to Bethel. Oh no, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions. So first the faithful migrate from Israel to Judah, which was exactly the thing that Jeroboam feared. And now we have a prophecy against the future of what Jeroboam is going to set up. Jeroboam's attempt to future-proof his rule, God says what? Yeah, that backfired. The altar will be torn down, the ashes will be poured out. Josiah in the future is going to kill the priests and burn human bones on the altar. Now, why does Jeroboam say, prophet of God, seize him? Why does he give that order? What's he trying to do? Yeah, he's trying to show he's in control. This is a dispute over who's really in control. Is Jeroboam in control of the kingdom, or is God in control of the kingdom? Jeroboam says, This is my kingdom. God rebuts. He says, No. And he withers Jeroboam's hand and destroys the altar just as he prophesied. So what's with the prophet's reaction in 1 Kings 13 where he rejects going home with Jeroboam? What's the story behind that? Oh yeah, there's that later. But I mean, why won't he go with Jeroboam? He says, if you gave me half your kingdom, wouldn't do it. Okay, God told him not to. What's God's purpose in telling him not to? What is he refusing from Jeroboam? Hospitality. Yep. He says, okay, Jeroboam, you're not even good enough for me to come under your roof, share bread and water with you. It's rejection in this society. It's the ultimate rejection. God is saying to Jeroboam, you are not good enough. I want to go back one more time and think about, why did God make Jeroboam king and what happened here? Well, what was Jeroboam's real problem? He never believed God. He never believed him. Now, here's the crazy thing about that to me, is that he got the first part of the promise. What about the second part? What would he have had to have done? If God keeps his promises, and God says, I'm going to give you the 10 tribes, and then if you'll serve me, you'll have a house in perpetuity, would Jeroboam's fears have come true? Absolutely not. But Jeroboam is a man who is ruled by his own fear. His fear is more important to him than the word of God. Why? What kind of person is Jeroboam? Even though he's an Israelite, he's effectively, an egomaniac. He's selfish. Is he a believer? No. Jeroboam's a non-believer. Jeroboam does not believe God. Remember? Okay, go ahead.
But they don't believe God.
Yeah, a lot of people believe in God, but they don't believe God. And that's an important distinction there, isn't it? We're going to come to Jehu later, and Jehu's actually one of my favorite kings, right? Jehu is going to turn this formula around, even though he's from the northern 10 tribes. Come and see my zeal for the Lord, he says at one point. He means it. All right. That's for another day. All right. Third, Jeroboam himself ends up with some personal consequences. 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 1 through 20. I'll just read the first part and the last part. It says, Ahijah the son of Jeroboam fell sick. Sorry, Abijah. Abijah is the son, Ahijah is the prophet. Jeroboam said to his wife, Arise and disguise yourself, that it not be known that you are the wife of Jeroboam, and go to Shiloh. Behold, Ahijah the prophet is there, who said of me that I should be king over this people. Take with you 10 loaves, some cakes, and a jar of honey. Go to him, and he will tell you what shall happen to the child. And we jump down, and we find out that Ahijah says, you've been rejected, your son's going to die. And Jeroboam's wife, down to verse 17, Jeroboam's wife arose and departed and came to Tirzah. She came to the threshold of the house, and the child died. And all Israel buried him and mourned for him, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by his servant Ahijah the prophet. If we look at, I meant to go up another verse to 16. He will give Israel up because of the sins of Jeroboam, which he sinned and made Israel to sin. So we have now the opposite situation, right? God said, if you'll serve me, then I will establish your house. Jeroboam says, I will not serve you, so God says, reject it. Not only that, but your house is going to be utterly destroyed. Your attempt at forging your own dynasty fails because you didn't do what I said. If we look at 1 Kings 13, 33 and 34, it says, Jeroboam did not turn from his evil. What he did became sin. And because of it, God cuts him off and destroys his entire household. All right, what does verses 1 through 3 of chapter 14, where he sends his wife, what does that reveal about Jeroboam's character? Do you think of anybody else that tried to disguise themselves? Yeah, Saul. He's acting just like Saul. Like, I'm gonna put on a disguise. You're gonna put on a disguise. There's no way that Ahijah is going to know who you are. I have this, hopefully that's an appropriately incredulous expression. I can't imagine treating God like that. Do we treat God like that? Sometimes we do. There's no way God sees this. He sees everything. Ahijah's ready when she comes in. Says, why'd you bother? I know who you are. All right. Got an interesting slide here. Oh, all right, here we go. This is the altar at Tel Dan. That's the that's one of the that they've excavated one of the altars that he set up. This is the seal of Megiddo mentioning Shema, servant of Jeroboam. So we've got a coin with Jeroboam's name on it. I thought that was really interesting. All right. Take the last 5 minutes or so. What are some personal lessons I can learn from King Jeroboam's reign? I'll do mine first. What if I told you there's something I want you to do? And if you do it, you'll be given an eternal place at God's side and be named an heir to a kingdom. Does that sound familiar? That's the offer to all of us, isn't it? To be called sons of God, to be called heirs of the promise, an eternal place at God's side. It's the same offer that God makes to Jeroboam. And on top of that, God has something specific that he wants from us in enacting that promise. Was Jeroboam's idea of how he wanted to set up worship of God what God wanted? Wasn't good enough. So when God says, here's how I want you to do things, and if you do them, I will give you eternal life. And if you don't do them, I will give you eternal death. Jeroboam is the poster child for that, folks. He is a warning for us. We don't get to go set up golden calves and serve God any way we like. Sister Jackson.
Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean upon your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. We don't believe God either if we trust in our own understanding.
We end up with crooked paths because we don't. It's a really simple promise, isn't it? I'll make your path straight. I will show you how to walk so that you don't even have to guess. It's already there. It's already ready. All right. Here's my other lesson from Jeroboam. Jeroboam is to me the epitome of those who fail to learn history's lessons. What happened every time the children of Israel fell into idolatry? They were punished for it. Happened over and over again in the book of Judges. God was merciful to them. Time and again, raised up judges for them. But ultimately, Jeroboam never looked at Solomon and said, man, that guy failed to serve God, so God took the kingdom away. Then he looks at his own life and he says, God's given me 10 tribes, and I'm not going to serve God. And I would love to say that that's some brand of insanity for Jeroboam, but I guarantee you that we've all done the same thing in our lives at some point. Go ahead, Debbie.
The whole thing is that Jeroboam thought in his own heart. When the going got tough, he didn't trust God. He panicked and decided he knew better and he was going to take control. And like you said, generation after generation after generation,
this happens, and every single time, God is faithful.
Yeah. All right. What are some personal lessons that you take away from King Jeroboam's reign? What are some things that you think about? All right, well, we can move on to the next question. What do I learn about the character of God from the history of King Jeroboam? What's the very first thing that we learn about God? Yeah, God is faithful. He means what he says. He does exactly what he tells you he's going to do. That's very reliable. That's a little scary too, that kind of reliability. So we need to take into account the fact that God is faithful for good and for destruction. What else? He wants to bless his people. He's gone out of his way to make Jeroboam the offer of a lifetime, of several lifetimes, really. God wants to bless his people. I want to go back to what Randy said, Randy Dean. God gives everyone a chance. Jeroboam didn't have to do evil. He had plenty of opportunities to do the right thing and obey God. In fact, even after he's disobeyed God, he has the opportunity to do what? He has the opportunity to change. He didn't have to make it worse, but every step of the way, he just keeps making it worse. We see the opposite in Rehoboam, right? Rehoboam at least has some glimmers of hope. We talked about that last week. He's oppressed a little bit. He immediately humbles himself. He does something he shouldn't. God sends word by a prophet. He says, we're returning home. He listened. Now, he didn't seek God like he should have, but he's got the good sense to listen when God speaks, unlike Jeroboam here. God gave everybody a chance. And we saw with Rehoboam how God responds to someone who humbles himself. So it was up to Jeroboam to choose right or wrong. He chose wrong every single time, consistently. How do you do that? We do that, don't we? All right. What else can we learn from the character? What else can we learn about the character of God from the history of King Jeroboam? I'll give you one more to kind of wrap things up. God gives us the kinds of leaders we deserve. If you are distressed with the kinds of leaders that we have, we might consider the character of our nation is giving us the kinds of leaders that the nation is asking for. The righteous left and went to Judah. What does that tell you about the character of the people who stayed in the northern kingdom? That they weren't righteous. I think that's how they already were. I think God chose Jeroboam and gave him the choice of whether or not to serve, and knew exactly what Jeroboam would choose because he knew the hearts of the people in the northern 10 tribes. He's not surprised by what happens. The events that take place are just God's way of getting those people to show their true colors. When God's people are oppressed in the New Testament, what happens? What happens during times of oppression in the Old Testament? What happens with righteous people when they're oppressed? They turn to God. They shine. Would we see Daniel? Would we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Would we see Esther? Would we see Paul? Would we see Peter and the apostles in the same light if it weren't for the adversity? That was their time to shine. God puts the spotlight on them with adversity. Lets their true character show. When we're faced with adversity, that's our chance to let our light shine all the brighter. All right, thank you for your attention. For next week, Jehoshaphat, it's on the sheet. 1 Kings 22, 41 through 50, and 2 Chronicles 17 through 20. And Jehoshaphat is the king who walks the line between good and evil. Think about that for next time. Thank you very much.